As many readers have noticed, there are a lot of structural parallels between the Manshine and the Ubers match. And if you think about it, that's actually quite remarkable. Up to this point, the manga seems to have avoided obvious similarities between its matches, especially those in close proximity to each other. But now, Blue Lock actively invites us to compare the Ubers match with the previous Manshine match, and uses the similarities and contrasts between them as a means to communicate its ideas. So what I want to investigate here is how the Manshine and Ubers matches inform each other and what that tells us about the overall story progression of the Neo Egoist League arc. Hello? My name is Sean, and I bet you've been itching to hear even more about the Ubers match. Before I start comparing the Manshine and Ubers matches, I want to briefly substantiate my claim that this kind of parallelism is unique within Blue Lock so far. Now, if we're looking for another story arc in which the same team plays multiple matches with the same rule set, the most obvious comparison is Blue Lock's first selection. But interestingly enough, every match in the first selection differs fundamentally from what came before it. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it. After all, the first selection is all about the progression of Team Z. From a chaotic frenzy in which every player only pursues their own interests, to the team finally coming together as a band of egoist strikers. Another notable point of comparison are the two matches against Rin's team in the second selection. On the one hand, this is the only instance in the series where we get to see mostly the same characters duking it out twice in close succession. And yet, these two matches feel completely different as well. Not only because the rematch is significantly longer, but also in the way it plays out. Where Rin positively slaughters Isagi's team the first time around, the outcome of the second match is determined by nothing but a stroke of luck. Or at least that's what Blue Lock at first makes it seem, of course. In that sense, the rematch again serves as a contrast of sorts. It's the capstone of all the growth that Isagi and his teammates underwent during the second selection. And thus, the whole point is that the two matches should not feel alike at all. So, with that in mind, let me just list some of the most blatant similarities between the Manshine and the Ubers matches. The two matches are of exactly equal length, totaling 31 chapters each. Both matches are won by BM with a final score of 3-2. Both matches are preceded by a flashback of a player who joins the German team's lineup in the following match, and proves instrumental in securing Bastard's winning goal. The opposing team's second goal comes about as a result of their team's best striker undergoing major character development. And in both matches, the manga unveils a new way of using one's eyes. I could go on to list more micro-level similarities, but I think the point is clear by now. I actually suspect that this is part of the reason why so many readers, and that's myself very much included, initially believed that the match would end with a victory for the Ubers. The similarities with Manshine were so obvious from the get-go, and at the time it seemed just a bit too predictable that the Ubers match would unfold along the very same lines as in the previous case. So, to start with, let's have a look at Nagi's and Barou's development in their respective matches. One of the key ideas of the Neo Egoist League is that the Blue Lock players will be exposed to the philosophies of established teams, and thus they'll have to negotiate between their pre-existing personal styles and the systems that have been in place in a professional team. As Ego puts it, this means that some of them will thrive in their new environment, while others might drown in unfamiliar waters. And so, Blue Lock shows this in practice by having most teams' focal character at first struggle to fit into their new team. Isagi arrives in a team that is grafted on a philosophy of extreme rationality, and he's confronted with the fact that he hasn't learned to rationally verbalize his ideal play. Nagi, meanwhile, is greeted by a speech about how talent will wither away if it isn't cultivated conscientiously. But that's a tall order for a player who has been cruising by on his talents alone all this time. And finally, Barou enters a team that treats football as a job, a means to put bread on the table. And that's in stark contrast to Barou, who is driven by a higher, more deeply personal calling to become a rightful king. In short, each of them hits a major roadblock at the start of the arc and must find a way to overcome this impasse. Anyways, let's turn back to Nagi and Barou, because this is where the structural similarities become really apparent. I'm not exaggerating when I say that their arcs follow the exact same pattern, beat by beat. Both of them are presented with a philosophy that challenges them in a fundamental way. And yet, they tentatively accept the teachings of their new master. And in both cases, they initially seem quite successful with their new approach. Nagi impresses by actively visualizing new plays, and Barou even manages to score within the highly coordinated Ubers system. But despite their growth, Isagi soon manages to completely shut down the new Nagi and Barou, to their visible frustration. And as a result, they eventually cast aside their master's teachings and embark on a course that is more in keeping with their initial approach to football. Nagi falls back on Reo's playmaking, and Barou bends his team to his own will instead of serving as part of an intricate tactical repertoire. And by doing so, they tip the scales of the match with a downright spectacular goal. But here's where it gets interesting. Even though their arcs parallel each other so closely, the manga frames the outcome in diametrically opposite ways. In Nagi's case, the original members of Manshine City lose interest in him, and both Isagi and Ego note that Nagi won't be able to reproduce his miracle goal. In other words, it's not something that will offer him a sustainable way forwards. But in the Ubers match, on the other hand, Snuffy acknowledges that Barou has completely surpassed his designs. And with that, Barou is crowned as the new king of the Ubers. So with this, let's return to Ego's statements at the end of the Barcha match. In the Neo Egoist League, the Blue Lock players are compared to fish that are plunged into foreign waters. Some will suffocate in a hostile new environment, while others will adapt and thrive, and some might even dye the water in their own colors. Now what's notable about this is that over the course of the arc, Isagi seems to pass through each of these three stages. When he first joins in with the Barcha match, he basically drowns within BM's pre-existing system. So then we reach the Manshine match, where he slowly adapts to Bastard's rational style of play. And finally, when he faces the Ubers, Isagi manages to make the entire team revolve around him. In other words, he dyes it in his own colors. Now, I won't go into the details about that last bit here. let's just say I have a bit of a video about that. And what's interesting on this front is that in both matches, Isagi's main rival is situated at pretty much the same stage as he is. When Isagi is still trying to find his footing in Bastard München, Nagi is taught how to play in an active style according to Manshine's philosophy. But while Isagi eventually absorbs the tenets of BM's hyper-rational playstyle, Nagi turns his back on Manshine by rejecting proactive football and entrusts himself to Reo's guidance once more. And as the recent chapters have shown, Nagi's decision has not benefited him in the long run. So right here, we get a strong contrast between Isagi's and Nagi's responses to their team's philosophy and their own struggle to fit in. Isagi has incorporated BM's rational approach and plays a pivotal role in their eventual victory, whereas Nagi failed to adapt to his new environment and seems to be drowning as a result. So then we reach the next match, and from the get-go it becomes clear that Barou has advanced to a further stage within Ego's scheme by his third match in the NEL. Barou has adapted to the tactical playstyle of the Ubers and positively thrives as the team's main striker. But over the course of the match, he progresses to the third stage. Instead of just acting within a set of predefined parameters, he hijacks the team from within and imposes his own will on his teammates. And so, Isagi must also become the focal point of his team if he wants to eke out a victory over Barou. And with his final goal, Isagi's arc over the course of the NEL comes full circle. When he first joined BM, Isagi failed to rationally visualize his ideal play. But by the end of the Ubers match, he showcases his visualization of the world's best for the entire world to see. And that's how he ends up surpassing even a striker who had reshaped his team in his own image. But there's another dimension to this, which may become very relevant in the foreseeable future. At least up till now, the manga has validated Chris Prince's football philosophy. Prince has proclaimed that talent needs to be properly cultivated. And when Nagi casts his advice to the wind, he ensures 2 consecutive losses for his team. In other words, the manga here shows us that there is value in absorbing the lessons of a new environment. But in the Ubers match, the manga communicates the exact opposite. Snuffy at first seems to espouse a powerful approach, but as we peel back the layers of his character, it turns out that his views are those of a broken man who has not come to terms with the death of his best friends. All his talk about work, adulthood, and professionalism is a sign that he has betrayed his younger self and given up on his dreams. And it's only through Barou that he can aspire to reach the top once more. In other words, Snuffy's initial philosophy is shown to be deeply flawed and in need of revision. So, where the Manshine match showed us that there is real value in the teachings of these world-class strikers, the Ubers match makes it clear that their masters are only a stepping stone on the way to the top. And with this in mind, I suspect that we will view Noah's extreme rationality in a completely different light by the end of the arc as well. So, now I want to move to another major parallel between the 2 matches. That between Reo and Hiori. During the Ubers match, there was a lot of fan discussion about the relationship between Hiori and Isagi. particularly about the question if Hiori would fully dedicate himself to Reo. And I got the sense that many fans were rather averse to this idea. Much of this, I suspect, was informed by the similarities with Reo's recent developments. At the start of the Manshine match, we're shown a flashback where Prince asks his Blue Lock players to articulate their vision of their best self. For Reo, this ideal is being an independent striker with the power to become the world's best on his own accord. And that's exactly what he does in the first minutes of the match against BM. He tries to score without relying on anyone else. But as it soon turns out, this individualistic approach is not enough to let him actually score goals. So when Nagi too feels that Manshine-style active football isn't enough to surpass Isagi, he calls upon Reo to support him once more. And with that, Reo decides to abandon the ideal he formulated at the beginning of the match in favor of aiding Nagi. And thereby, they return to their codependent relationship from the start of the manga. Now, let's go to Hiori in the latter part of the Ubers match. What's striking about him is that his initial wish isn't to play football, but to play with Isagi and to follow Isagi's leads. So when Hiori eventually gets subbed in, he dedicates himself to supporting Isagi. And with that, the series basically sets up Hiori as a second Reo. Both of them offer themselves up to bring out another player's full potential. And given that Reo's approach is framed as him abandoning his personal ideal and as a detriment in the long term, it's no surprise that many readers worried about Hiori going down the same path. On the flip side, Isagi also firmly casts his dynamic with Hiori as one of leader and follower. When he advocates for Hiori over Kyorajin, he does so because he wants Hiori to support his goals. So with that, Isagi acts very similarly to Nagi in the Manshine match. Nagi specifically asks Reo to help him, not to collaborate as equals. So when Isagi eventually scores his winning goal by linking up with Hiori, the manga in many ways suggests that their partnership might be a second coming of codependency, following in the footsteps of the Nagi-Reo duo. Yet, there's a crucial difference between Hiori and Reo, and I think the manga uses this juxtaposition to make that point all the more clear. When Nagi asks Reo to join him once more, Reo is initially reluctant to return to their previous relationship. By now, he's been burnt enough that he doesn't want his fate to be dictated by the whims of Nagi's ego. But Nagi responds that this isn't his ego speaking. Rather, he's driven to fulfill their shared dream. That's the thing that convinces Reo to partner up with Nagi once more. The renewed promise that they'll ride their dreams to the top of the world. In other words, Reo's downfall is his decision to subordinate his ego to his dreams. Now, when we compare this to the Hiori situation, it's striking that Hiori's arc moves in the exact opposite direction. Hiori starts off wanting to play for Isagi's sake, but as the match progresses, he starts wavering about the path he is taking and how to justify that within Blue Lock's teachings. But after resolving his doubts, Hiori discovers the source of his own ego. He doesn't want to score goals himself, but rather he wants to direct others in a way that will change the entire football world. And here's where it gets interesting. If we read the ending of the Ubers match in light of Reo's previous development. When Isagi scores the winning goal, he feels like he has met Hiori in a place beyond their wildest dreams. In that sense, Isagi isn't all that different from Nagi. What he wanted for himself is a right-hand man who will make his dream a reality. And so, he urges Hiori that they should keep going together, all the way to the top of the football world. And note just how similar this line is to the one Reo states when he reunites with Nagi. So to put it differently, what Isagi wants at the end of the Ubers match is something akin to the codependency of Nagi and Reo. But in a surprising twist, Hiori has a completely different ambition. Where Nagi, Reo, and potentially even Isagi prioritize their dreams over their ego, Hiori has discovered the true depths of his ego and finds that it involves something greater than just pairing up with Isagi. And so, he breaks off their partnership and declares that he will aim to produce the world's greatest striker, with or without Yoichi Isagi. So to put it simply, Reo went from individualist to subordinate, from egoist to dreamer, whereas Hiori went from subordinate to individualist and put his ego first place. And by the current point in the story, the results speak for themselves. After Nagi and Reo paired up, Manshine lost 2 matches in a row. But Hiori, on the other hand, ensured BM's 3rd victory. So that's it from my side, but let me know if you spotted any further parallels between the 2 matches. I know that most of you probably want me to look forward towards the PXG match, but I first wanted to tie up some loose ends from my Ubers analysis. Back when I was working on my initial discussion about Hiori, I was acutely aware of the similarities between him and Reo and knew that they were super significant. But at the same time, it didn't quite fit in with my overall argument. And let's be real, the Ubers analysis was plenty long already without it. So I decided instead to dedicate a separate video to the topic. And here we are. Anyways, thanks so much for tuning in as always, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.